Hey, what's up guys? It's Nick2. Today I'm going to be bringing you guys a nearly perfected rapid fire rogue build, which is probably one of the strongest builds in the game. It has unbelievably high damage output, easily being able to one-shot a lot of the tormented bosses when they are staggered, and you can very easily carry your friends with this build. I was also fairly easily able to do tier 8 Infernal Hordes, and overall the build is just a ton of fun. It is extremely satisfying just seeing absolutely insane numbers. Against these training dummies, the rapid fire numbers got up into the billions, and that is per arrow, and I think you shoot about 20 arrows or so, but on average, when enemies are fully CC'd and you have all of your damage multipliers up, I'd say you probably are hitting for about 400 to 500 million per arrow in the Infernal Hordes. And against bosses, it's probably around 200 to 300. It really depends because you have a lot of conditional damage modifiers with this build, but regardless, I think this is probably Rogue's second strongest build next to Endariel's, which is what I will be setting up next. Although the benefit of Rapid Fire Rogue is that one, it is extremely fun to play, very, very good for ad clear, and it is just super satisfying. But two, it doesn't really require much gear to get going at all. All you need is the unique ring, Scoundrel's Kiss, and boom, the build pretty much comes online. You can just slap it together with whatever, and you don't need an uber unique for the entirety of the build to function. Obviously though, this is going to be a nearly perfected version, so I'm going to be showing the build with an uber unique, or with multiple rather, because that is the nearly perfected version of it. However, you can super easily set the build up without any uber uniques, and I will have a link to a starter version of the build, etc. in the description. So this is a fantastic rogue starter build, and if you really like the ranged playstyle and using combo points and just hitting for massive numbers on your screen, just blowing everything up with cold immunity, this is definitely going to be the build for you, and is one of the strongest builds this season. Before I get into the build, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, which is the Mobalytics desktop app, which you guys can download completely for free, and all of my builds are over on Mobalytics, so this is a fantastic addition. If you like to use a lot of my builds, you can very easily download the desktop app, and it has a really nice UI. You can just quickly look at the builds, and one of the nice things about having the desktop app installed is that you can press Tab Q in game, and you can actually just click on the build. Not only can you click on my builds, and you can favorite some builds so you can have them saved, but there's a whole bunch of other builds that you can sort through here. There's community builds, so you can just even post your own if you wanted to, mess around in the build planner, mess with the Paragon boards, etc. Or you could even just every once in a while check the meta, and there's a whole bunch of stuff here. This is always being updated, but let's say you wanted to copy one of my builds, you could quickly just in-game press Tab Q, and then if you want to copy the Paragon board, look how convenient this is. This makes it way easier to copy paste a whole bunch of stuff, and anytime that you're curious about stuff like, oh, what do I need on my ring, while you're literally looking at gear on the ground, you can just be like, oh, okay, on my amulet or on my ring, whatever, I want ranks of devouring blaze, attack speed, cooldown reduction. Look at your character in game. It's very, very convenient. They have a whole bunch of other stuff on the app as well. You can even pop open the full screen here, check out the interactive map, and like I said, there's a whole bunch of community builds, and feel free to make your own build on here as well. It is very helpful. So make sure to download the app completely for free by using my link in the description. And again, all of my builds will be posted on there and updated, so I would highly recommend checking it out. When it comes to the build, all you need to get it started, which is probably my favorite part about it, is Scoundrel's Kiss. I swapped this build as early as level 60. I got Scoundrel's Kiss out of the Infernal Horde reputation cache pretty much instantly, and I was able to swap to this, and I was doing 10 times damage a second that I swapped to Rapid Fire. Rapid Fire by default just does really high damage, and then as you start to scale it with combo points, you get a whole bunch of crit damage, etc. And you get stuff like what's on the Scoundrel's Kiss, chance to rapid fire projectiles to cast twice. It just does really crazy damage, and because you're using combo points, you don't need any sort of energy generation. There isn't any gear break points that you're really worried about. It just works right out the gate. If you don't have Scoundrel's Kiss, you can go do Lord Zir. That is a great way to do it, or I believe I think I also got one by doing the season journey, so you could feel free to check that out. Oh, I guess I haven't claimed that yet. Anyways, outside of Scoundrel's Kiss, you don't need anything for the build to work. Some other uniques will definitely make it better, which I will talk about, but that is the only one that I would say is maybe try to get this prior to swapping, just because the stats on it are really good, and it just makes it to a rapid fire, kind of shoots and looks like you're peeing on the guys, and it does AoE damage, and it just does, makes rapid fire do significantly more damage. Outside of that, there's two main ways that we are scaling the damage with rapid fire. One is via the precision key passive, which is another reason that it's great to just swap and start using rapid fire ASAP, because precision passive makes it to where anytime you use marksman skills via our puncture or our rapid fire, we gain stacks of precision. When we're at 4 stacks, our next shot is a guaranteed crit, so we don't have to worry about crit chance at all, and then it's just going to do significantly more crit damage, and that number of crit damage is going to scale up based on how much crit we have on our gear. So currently I have a 414% bonus, but this actually goes up to 1000 when we pair it with one of our passives, which is unbelievably ridiculous. Next to that, we try to get a lot of damage versus crowd controlled, and that is one of the main ways that we are scaling the build. You get damage versus crowd controlled in the form of like Frigid Finesse is a lot of damage. Cold Imbuement also gives us a huge amount of damage. We have a lot with our legendaries, etc. We also gain a lot of extra damage by using Smoke Grenade. This is just a 25% damage increase, and it's going to daze enemies, which is synergistic for some other reasons. And then we use Dark Shroud. This is going to give us a massive amount of damage reduction. We don't actually put it on our bar because we're using an aspect that just gives it to us for free by simply just getting lucky hits, which we will be doing perpetually, so you don't have to put this on your bar. And then for our last two skill slots, these are kind of optional, to be honest with you. I go for Caltrops because it increases our damage, mainly against bosses. Personally, I hate this skill. Like, I absolutely hate using it because I don't like my character going backwards, and it feels like it kind of slows down the gameplay. But it's undeniably really strong. It counts as a trap skill, so we get Deadly Ambush in the Paragon Board. Enemies take up to 45% increased damage. It helps CC bosses because it chills and slows. Like, overall, it's just a really good package, and it counts as an agility skill, which is good for one of our glyphs. So Caltrops is like, you can definitely take it off and use like dash instead. You will just bite the bullet and lose a bit of damage. Personally, instead of dash, I'm using Shadow Step because I hate not having some sort of unstoppable effect, but you could swap that to dash if you prefer, or even concealment, but concealment's a way longer cooldown and not really going to help us. Quickly dive into the skill tree, and then we can talk about gear, etc. When it comes to our basic skill, I like to use Puncture. Early on into the game, you can use Heartseeker if you prefer that, and it is going to give you a crit damage bonus there, but Puncture, I've always just used Puncture. It just feels a lot nicer. When it comes to Rapid Fire, obviously max it out, and then we go for Advanced Rapid Fire, so we get 30% extra damage anytime that we dash, which we're going to be doing all the time. Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes, ton of survivability there. 1 point to Shadow Step. If you wanted more DR, you could go into Methodical Shadow Step, but it only lasts for 3 seconds, so I think it's a little weak. Weapon Mastery, I have a ton of ranks via my Amulet, but this is just extra damage. Caltrops, extra damage. And the CC effect here. And then we get Unstable Elixirs and Trick Attacks. Trick Attacks is unbelievably insane. Talk more about it when I go over my helmet, but that is why I have 9 ranks of this. But this paired with Precision is absolutely busted. I mean, even if we didn't have Precision, I mean, unbelievably strong. And then we have Agile for just a little bit of dodge chance for survivability. Smoke Grenade with the cooldown reset. Then we max out Dark Shroud and we get the heal there. And then I have Exploit, Malice for damage. Cold Imbuement is great. It's going to instantly freeze enemies, and it's going to last for a multitude of casts. And Cold Imbuement allows us to just hit really, really hard. It's also going to apply Vulnerable for us. It is a lucky hit, but because we're shooting like 20 arrows at once, we pretty much instantly apply it. So that's real good. And then we go into Frigid Finesse for 30% increased damage against frozen enemies, which is really nice. And then, of course, we go into the Precision passive for a ton of extra damage. When it comes to gear, uniques, etc. So a lot of the uniques you don't actually need for the build to function. The only one you need is Scoundrel's Kiss. Everything else is really just supplemental. The starter version of the build is going to be a little different than the Uber Unique version. The main reason for that is with Uber Uniques, you get Tyrael's Might, which just instantly maxes out all your resistances. And then because you max out your resistances, it's way easier to armor cap yourself. Therefore, you can move around a lot of your legendaries, your stats on your gear, and you can get a little bit more max HP. But early on, when you don't have Tyraels, you need to put like resistance and armor on your gear, and you need to do that very tediously, and you also need a different Paragon board. But just check the link in the description and just click on the starter build and just follow that to a T, and you should be fine. Other uniques that are worth mentioning that are very good. The main one is Sky Hunter here. Not only does the passive unique effect just give you 60% increased crit damage all the time, so that's just extra damage for us. 60% is pretty good. It also gives us chance for marksman projectiles to cast twice, so we don't lose out on that. We get attack speed, which we otherwise couldn't get on our two-hander, and it just gives you a ridiculous amount of crit damage, which is really good for scaling precision. It gives you way more crit damage than a normal like crossbow would. I think I have a double GA one here, yeah, like 150%, but obviously granted mine is masterworked, right? But that's a greater affix one. Mine is masterworked 536%, which just scales our precision passive like crazy. So getting Sky Hunter is really good for us. And then getting Condemnation is also nice, just 40% increased damage. And I like that it has basic skill attack speed on here. This one's a little bit more optional. It's like almost as powerful as a normal other one-hander. So feel free to do whatever you prefer. Just make sure that it rolls at a 40%. I mainly like Condemnation because on average you can throw like 2 punctures rather than 3, so it just speeds up the gameplay a little bit there. A lot of people like to use Umbra Crux. I personally don't find it necessary. I also just find it a little cumbersome to play around, especially when you're mobbing or doing Infernal Hordes. Feel free to use it if you prefer. instead of the normal legendary weapon, I do think you lose a little bit of damage, but it can help out in certain situations. It's also kind of buggy, so use at your own caution. I just prefer to not use it, so I'm not including it in the build, and I think it just makes the build a little harder to play with, which isn't really necessary because the build already has a lot going on. Other uniques, Ring of Starless Skies is fantastic. It's just 50% increased damage, gives us attack speed, and we get the ranks of the core skills, but absolutely not mandatory or necessary really that much at all. And then one unique, which is unbelievably insane, you do lose some survivability to use this, but it gives you ranks to trick attacks and unstable elixirs. And trick attacks is completely busted, and I want to quickly just demonstrate that. So obviously mine is greater affix and masterworked. I got pretty lucky with that, but you can see right here, it'll give me 108% crit damage, okay? So by default, basically just doubling my damage by using trick attacks, but it also scales precision. So you can see that right now, my precision is at 414%. Look at what happens when all you need to do is just daze or stun enemies, which I will benefit from by just pressing healing potion, which is going to stun everything, or if I use my smoke grenade, that will also daze everything. So I'll just use my health potion, boom, stun everything there, and then my precision passive went up to 903%, which is pretty insane. So getting this helmet is a massive damage increase, especially because it gives you ranks to unstable elixirs on top of it, which is just damage active all the time. Alternatives to that, though, if you want more damage reduction, you can go for Harlequin's Crest. That is nice. And Dariel's Visage is also okay, I guess. You're not really going to do much with it because it's not in Dariel's build, but I guess you'll get the, I don't know, maximum poison res and some attack speed, I guess. It probably wouldn't be great. I'd most likely go for Harlequin's if I wanted to use any other helmet because it gives you a lot of damage reduction and max HP. But Cowl of the Nameless is just a crazy amount of damage, like more than doubling your damage by using this pretty much. It is less effective on bosses, however, I will say, because you're not always dazing them. But when you're ad clearing and stuff, the damage benefit from this is crazy. When it comes to other legendaries, this is how I like to have it set up for a more overall consistent version. There are a couple different options though, especially if you don't have some of the uber uniques. One that I really like is Cold Clip, I suppose it's called, or Bone Blade, I don't know what it's called. Your basic skills are always cold imbued, and you just deal 20% increased damage to enemies that are chilled or frozen. Helps with staggering on bosses having your basic skill cold imbue. They just instantly freezes stuff pretty much. And 20% increased damage is 20% increased damage. On my amulet, I like to put Edgemaster because it's damage all the time, and we pretty much always have our full resource, so it's just 30% damage all the time. A lot of people go for Retribution, but I found that where you need damage a lot is when you're fighting the bosses in the Infernal Hordes that aren't staggered, so I prefer to just have Edgemasters here, in which case you could even get rid of Retribution and do Expectant instead, which is 20 to 30% damage depending upon how many basic skills you use in between each attack. But they're fairly interchangeable. You'll just see slightly bigger numbers against mobs that are crowd controlled when you use Retribution. And you will be stunning enemies constantly because you will have lucky hit chance to stun on your gear, and if you use a health potion, you will stun everything as well. Then on the boots, we go for Frostbitten, just 25% increased crit damage against frozen or stunned enemies, and again, enemies are instantly frozen, or just stunned with our health potion, but frozen with cold imbuement. Other options that are good, like I said, Expectant is pretty good, just 30% increased damage. Previously, I was using Rapid, but once you get enough attack speed and you masterwork your gear, you don't really need the basic skill attack speed on here anymore. Alternatively, that could be Accelerating as well if you wanted to go for even more attack speed, but it does become a little redundant at some point. We don't use the Rapid Fire Legendary because it simply just doesn't really help us that much. We already pretty much instantly one-shot all group of elites because Rapid Fire explodes with the unique, so we don't really need any additional AoE. We want to just increase our single target damage. Defensive aspect wise, we always want to have Umbrus on because this will just give us Dark Shroud for free, so we don't have to put it on our bars, and Dark Shroud is a ton of damage reduction. Obviously I have Tyrael's Might and Cowl of the Nameless, but if you don't have that, you could go for Aspect of Might here. This will just give you 20% damage reduction all the time. And then there's also a new Dark Shroud one paired with Healing Potions, which is actually quite synergistic because we're using Healing Potions quite a lot. Using a Healing Potion makes a free Dark Shroud, and it'll just give you increased damage reduction with Dark Shroud. You could slam that on an amulet, and that will give you a lot of extra DR, about 20% on average. Or you could decide to go for another utility aspect in the form of Concussive Strikes, which will just give you extra damage, which you could use against bosses, but personally, I like to have a little bit more survivability. When it comes to rolls on gear and how you want your Masterworks to land, Cowl of the Nameless, try to get Greater Affix Trick Attacks, and just try to get that Masterwork as much as humanly possible, because that is just way better than anything else. The Lucky Hit roll is completely irrelevant. Tyrael's Might is ideal. If you don't have Tyrael's Might, you just want a normal chest, and again, just check the link in the description, but you'll probably want some form of resistance, max HP armor, armor capping yourself is very important, so I probably did that a very particular way. I don't even remember how at this point, but for the ultimate version of the build, you want Tyrell's Might and you want the damage reduction to be as high as humanly possible, and maybe have one Masterwork into the maximum res as well. Tyrell's Might is great because it just instantly res caps you, so you don't have to worry about it at all. Therefore, you can move around a lot of other rolls that would otherwise be, fixing your resistances. You can move it around for max HP and stuff, and you can get up to 40% DR on it. And maximum res is just crazy. It's just a very, very nice defensive piece. Obviously, you lose some damage using it because you won't have dexterity. You won't have a damage legendary here, but for the survivability that it gives you, it is just way too strong. On the gloves, you want dex, crit damage, and ranks 2 rapid fire. My gloves are okay. They just rolled with core skill, and you want to temper, lucky hit chance to stun or freeze or daze, and then imprint or temper crit damage as well. Ideally, you probably want your Masterworks to hit the crit damage. Haven't entirely mathed that out. Either hit the crit damage or the ranks 2 rapid fire. Either or is fine. My gloves are kind of just whatever, so I'm not worried about it that much. On my pants, you need one singular armor roll and all Royal Skulls in order to armor cap yourself if you have Tyrell's Might and Cowl of the Nameless. Otherwise, you could just temper on armor percentage and you'll be perfectly fine if you don't have Royal Skulls and stuff, but it's pretty easy to come by. And try to get maximum HP, dexterity, again the armor roll, and then temper on max HP and lucky hit chance of stun, freeze, or daze. And then we go for Umbrus like I mentioned. Try to probably get all the greater affixes to be on max HP and all of the Masterworks there. Unless you want damage, then just go for dexterity, but having max HP, like the only downfall of this build is I say it's a little squishy, but max HP helps with that a lot. I have 42k here, and that could be higher. Boots, pretty much the same as the pants. Dexterity, max HP. If you really want armor, you could swap movement speed to armor there. And then I temper movement speed and lucky hit chance to freeze. And again, I have frostbitten. On the Sky Hunter, you either make sure that it's a 60% roll, that's pretty important, but you also want to make sure that the crit damage is high and the chance for marksman projectiles to cast twice is high. I have not yet done the math on whether or not it's better to have higher crit damage versus having like the greater affix roll on chance for projectiles to cast twice. But you can see that a greater affix chance for marksman projectiles to cast twice is really, really good. Default 67%, so if you just masterwork that all the way, that's easily 100%. So 100% of the time, your rapid fire is shooting double there, and it's the same thing with your puncture. So that would help with consistency a lot, but generally try to either get crit damage or chance for marksman projectiles to cast twice. They're probably relatively similar in terms of how much damage you're benefiting from. You just get so much crit damage on Sky Hunter, it's pretty insane. On your one-hander, you want to have dexterity, max HP, crit damage, try to get GA on crit damage and masterwork the crit damage, and then you want chance for rapid fire projectiles to cast twice. If you want to do more boss damage, you could swap the chance for rapid fire projectiles to Caltrops duration, which will just make it last about 13 to 12 seconds or so that it lasts longer, so you are getting the benefit of the 45% damage increase longer. The bosses in T8 Infernal Hordes like jump all over the freaking place, so you don't benefit from this a ton. And I just like having the damage be all around pretty good, but try to aim for the Masterworks and the greater affix on the crit damage because that's going to benefit you the most. Condemnation, the rolls don't really matter because the stats in here are pretty bad. You just want the 40% to be maxed out pretty much. Next to that, I would probably go for basic skill attack speed and try to Masterwork that. I haven't even full upgraded my Condemnation. Either dexterity or the basic skill attack speed is what I would go for. Scoundrel's Kiss, you want the masterworking or greater affixes to go into rapid fire and chance for rapid fire projectiles to cast twice. On Ring of Starless Skies, you want all of it to go to core skills or attack speed. Crit chance doesn't help us, neither does lucky hits. On the amulet, there's a ton of different stuff that you can get. I quite like mine. Dexterity is good because it just increases our damage overall. Weapon Mastery is also quite nice because we are using a bow, so we just get multiplicative damage to vulnerable enemies. It's a fairly low value, but it's still helpful. I don't believe you can get trick attacks. If you can, then you probably want that, but you can get unstable elixirs, which is pretty nice. Just I think it's 6% per rank is pretty good. You just have that up all the time. Alternatively, you can get Frigid Finesse, which is 10% per rank against frozen enemies, but it's not going to help you against bosses unless they are staggered. So you'll see bigger numbers, especially against elites. But I kind of like what my role is because it's just damage all the time, right? Like I just have a ton of ranks to Weapon Mastery, which is all the time, Unstable Elixirs all the time, and Dexterity is all the time. Ideally, I'd probably have the Unstable Elixirs as a greater affix, and that one Masterworked a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with it. and you want to temper on cold imbuement lasts for 3 casts. Ideally, this would be 4 casts, but mine didn't roll very well. I had a Masterwork land on it, so that kind of helps because it's at +3. It might have, I don't know if it would have stayed at +2 or would have gone to +3. Regardless, I don't know though. But because we're using 2 rings here, we can't get the cold imbuement temper there, so we want to have it on here, and having it last for another 4 casts, meaning we pretty much have it all the time. And then you temper crit damage, and you want the greater affixes, or sorry, the masterworking to probably go on unstable elixirs or the crit damage if I were to re-roll this again, but it's not that big of a deal. When it comes to the Paragon board, in the first board, I like to have control, just extra damage against frozen enemies. You could swap this if you wanted to just have more damage against all enemies, but 20% is really nice when mobbing. Then we go into Cheap Shot, 25% damage, active a lot of the time, get a lot of DR on the way. And then I go into Canny, just 10% damage pretty much. And then we go into Combat. Combat is not super insane because there is a lot of diminishing returns on all the crit damage that we're getting, but this is going to scale our precision passive, which then scales off of trick attacks, and we have so many ranks of trick attacks that it actually ends up making combat worth it versus a normal glyph, so we do want to max this out. And we grab Exploit Weakness, which is just 25% damage, active a fairly good portion of the time. And then we go into Ranger for some damage reduction, and we get Deadly Ambush. Most enemies aren't affected by our traps. We're mainly just using this for bossing, but it's only a couple points to grab it, so we may as well. And then get some max HP on the way. And then currently I'm using Devious, but you would actually prefer to use, let me see if I can find it. You'd prefer to use Fluidity, and this is one of the reasons that it's nice to actually be using Caltrops, because it counts as an agility skill, and you have multiple ranks of it. I like having it here because it gives you an increase to maximum HP, and that helps with your survivability a lot, but Devious is almost as good. Just not quite as consistent, I would say, as Fluidity, because you'll just have this damage increase all the time, pretty much. Eldritch Bounty, just 20% increased damage with our cold imbuement, and then Cunning Stratagem makes it to where we have way more rapid fire projectiles anytime that we shoot our rapid fire. Alright, that is pretty much it for the build. When it comes to actually playing with it, I'll go over a couple little tips right here, and then I'll talk about some gameplay. When you go into a large group of mobs, one of the main things is that you just have a lot of buffs that you want to make sure that you're upkeeping. One of them is going to be Unstable Elixirs, just gives you increased damage for 10 seconds, so every 10 seconds you want to be popping this. And also every 5 seconds you want to make sure that you are either stunning or dazing enemies so that you have trick attacks active. So if you go into a group of mobs, ideally you don't start out with any Dark Shroud, so you want to start at a distance, throw some punctures out just to get your Dark Shroud shadows up. Now that you have that and you feel a little bit safe, pop your cold imbuement, and then whatever order you want to use stuff in is up to you. You can smoke grenade, caltrops, health pot, and then start shooting. And then every time that you shoot, you want to make sure that you spacebar, because you're going to animation cancel. As you can see, rapid fire has a little bit of an animation, and you can't move during that animation. And if your attack speed is really low, that animation will be pretty long. But if you spacebar, you will animation cancel, and if you're spacebarring, you're getting the increase in damage there, 30% for 5 seconds, so you can just pretty much perpetually do that. Not too involved, it will just take a little bit of getting used to with all the movement and stuff, and also, based on where you want to dash, just move your cursor, and that can help with your movement a little bit. That is pretty much it for, I guess, a little bit of gameplay tips. You get used to it. It feels a little bit weird at the start. You want to just make sure to be using all of your skills pretty much. If there's a big elite that you're scared of, throw a smoke grenade on him so he takes extra damage. Caltrops away if you're scared. Make sure to cold imbuement on cooldown. If you get in a scary situation and you're stunned, use your health pot and it'll instantly stun everything else, and then they will take more damage because they are stunned. And just save your Shadow Step for any time that you are gonna get CC'd. That's the main reason that I use it. Otherwise, build is, I wouldn't say it's easy to play, but you definitely get used to it, and it is a lot of fun. It's great just absolutely mowing everything down, just doing ridiculous amounts of damage. I wish that less of the damage was reliant on the mobs being crowd controlled, because then your bossing would be a little bit better. But when the mobs are crowd controlled, oh my god, do you do some of the most damage in the game, and it is extremely satisfying to play. One thing I want to note is that if you want more survivability, I left a tanky version of the build down in the Mobalytics link as well. Basically, you can just add a legendary to your amulet rather than a damage one. You honestly don't really need more damage when mobbing. It's kind of overkill, to be honest, so if you have more survivability, it'll just make the build feel a lot cozier. You can go Harlequin's Crest. You'll lose a ton of damage, but you will gain a ridiculous amount of survivability if you go Harlequin's Crest, so kind of a pick and choose, depends on if you want to just feel like you're invincible or not. Otherwise, that is pretty much it for the build. I hope that you guys found it helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it down in the comments, and very soon I will be making the Endariel's Rogue, so feel free to stay tuned for that. In terms of which build is better, I'd say overall Endariel's is probably better because it seems a little tankier for one. It seems way easier to play. The mobbing seems potentially slower, but maybe when it's perfectly set up, it could be comparable. It's kind of hard for me to tell until I play it. But Endariel's needs Endariel's, and you need to hit attack speed breakpoints, and you need to get a ton of lucky hit for the build to really start working. Rapid Fire kind of just works, and it's just, I mean, they're different play styles, right? I think that I'll probably like Rapid Fire kind of more in terms of how much fun it is to play, but I think Endariel's will just be a little cozier, and I think it is overall stronger. I've seen boss melts with Endariel's that just like literally insta-kill the boss because it doesn't require the mobs to be CC'd nearly as much as Rapid Fire does. And the damage is kind of just out of control with that build. I think it's just a little overtuned in terms of how much Endariel's is actually giving you. But neither here nor there, I would say that this build is still S tier. I'd say Endariel's is probably like S+, but Rapid Fire is still S tier or maybe like A+. You can do T8s, you can absolutely annihilate bosses, and you know, the title says build is perfected, but there's obviously way more things you could do to make the build better. My masterworks aren't insane. I don't have, you know, quadruple greater affix gear or anything like that. But I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm very happy to move on and try something else. But I just wanted to get the video out there for you guys that are interested in playing Rapid Fire this season, which I think is still a fantastic option. And as you can see, it's a ton of fun. Just one-shotting all the Hellborns in the Infernal Hordes, one-shotting pretty much anything in the pit. It's really, really fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.